I'm looking at an article from the Center for Global Development that is projecting the probability of another global pandemic in the coming decades. And they did some modeling, mathematical modeling, based on past epidemics and maybe borderline pandemics, and estimated that the severity and frequency of pandemics is increasing at a certain rate, right? They did a linear or maybe exponential regression of severity and frequency. Severity based on the number of deaths, frequency based on the number of spillover events. I'm guessing epidemics spilling over from one country to another. And they estimated that the probability in every given year of a COVID-19 was about 2.5 to 3.3%, which puts the probability of us having another pandemic on par with COVID-19 at about 50-50. And then they went on to talk about what measures we could do to contain this, and the cost of it. And I seem to remember for COVID-19, when you broke down the cost, it was about millions of dollars to save each one person's life. Now, what they did was they took all the costs related to all the precautions we had to take. Obviously, the economy slowed down, government spent a lot of money, and then they estimated how many lives were saved. They divided the costs by the number of lives. It was in the millions. And I'm thinking to myself, gee, I think that the millions could have been better spent on people actually taking good care of their immune systems. Now, what do I mean by that? Case in point, my first day of the quarantine, I was worried if I could find suitable food. I'm a recovering autistic. I have high-functioning autism. You would never notice it because I control it with my diet. But you lock me up with standard American diet, oh my God, I would not survive outside of an institution for very long. Okay, so I was worried about that. I needed a chelating agent called alpha-lipoic acid. I have high body mercury burden, or at least I did. Now that I regularly take alpha-lipoic acid, it's under control. Now the thing about mercury is that if you go test your blood for mercury, draw some blood and test it for mercury. So I think they use some gas chromatograph, I don't know how to pronounce that word, GCMS, to test for mercury. The problem is the test would be very inverted. People who are heavy in mercury would test low and vice versa if you just did a plain old test. And the reason for that is that we're all exposed to more or less the same mercury from our background environment, but there are people who have a harder time getting rid of it. And so the proper way to test for mercury is to take a chelating substance 12 to 24 hours before taking that test, and then take the test. And when I did that, my results were off the charts. I think I was in the top 1 percentile, and I need to take alpha-lipoic acid pretty much regularly to keep that under control. Now I'm in the pretty normal range. To give you an idea of how abnormal my mercury was, when I first started taking alpha-lipoic acid, I had to take it in a very specific regimen, having to wake up in the middle of the night to take it every 3 hours, and or else I would have even more severe symptoms. I don't have to do that anymore because my mercury levels are much more under control. The maintenance level is don't need to be taken like that, and I don't feel any detox symptoms out of that. But I still have to be careful about my diet, which is why last March I was a little bit worried about if I could find suitable food at the store, right? The last thing I would want is maybe COVID-19 wasn't going to bother me so much, but because I couldn't find my alpha-lipoic acid or my other supplements, or I had to resort to eating junk food, that it started to affect me, right? The lockdown would have done much more harm than good to me if that were the case, right? That was my big fear. Well, my fear was a little bit misguided, because when I went to the store, I didn't have problems finding alpha-lipoic acid. I didn't have problem finding vitamins. I didn't have problems finding healthy foods. In fact, Had I been eating junk food, I might have had a big problem. People were fighting over junk food at the store. And the beer aisle was really comical because people were fighting over beer. There were broken bottles on the floor. But there was this one brand that nobody wanted just because they had the misfortune of having a bad name that was connected to the crisis, right? And I laughed out of control looking at that. I'm thinking this is never going to play out well. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, before the days of the pandemic, right, I started eating healthier, and I used to be very proud of that. And I would go around telling people about all the dangers of soda, and everybody told me that they lived in America. It was their choice to poison themselves. You know, it was their choice to get cancer at an early age. You know, why should I live to be? I don't even want to live to be 80. Why do I want to live to be 100? Right? That's what people always told me. Right? Now, I think the pandemic has shown that your own ill health kind of affects everybody else, right? When you turn yourself into a vector of disease. Now, let me give you another example. I used to travel to Taiwan a lot. I had 2 grandparents there. I had aunts and uncles there. I had a computer AI conference that was often held in Taiwan. In Taiwan, it's just the other way around. People chide you for all sorts of suboptimal health habits. So my grandmother is worried about me doing intermittent fasting. You got to understand, she grew up during World War II. They often didn't have enough to eat. They were forced to fast. And, you know, my grandmother's 90 years old. She doesn't seem to connect all the fasting she was forced to do with her age. And she's still very healthy. She doesn't live in a nursing home or anything like that. But I guess she went through a lot of suffering, and when she sees me fast, she worries about that, and she chides me nonstop about that. You would never see that in the United States. I go to the computer game conference, and you gotta understand, I'm only in Taiwan a couple weeks out of a year. I haven't been there in 2 years, obviously. And so if there's something that's available to eat over in Taiwan that's not available here, there's a lot of good sushi there, I'm probably going to somewhat overindulge, right? At least relative to somebody who lives in Taiwan and can eat it anytime they want. I'm definitely going to overindulge, right? And people get very upset and they get worried for me. These are total strangers at the computer game conference. These are distant relatives, distant cousins, and they get upset about that. You would never see that in the United States. But guess what? Taiwan had, 20 COVID-19 deaths throughout the whole pandemic and a few hundred cases. And I want people to realize that their own ill health affects other people. Right? Yes, I do think that we should live and let live, but when your own ill health causes you to become a vector of contagious disease, it's not your choice anymore, right?